This is the Khmer Times News. My name is Paolo Bonini, and these are your headlines. Gunmen hold prison officers at gunpoint to free a drug kingpin. A policeman is accused of torture and another man dies in police custody. And a $100 million con that has destroyed hundreds of lives. But first, our headline story. Now, this story has no equal when it comes to sensational headlines. That of 5 masked gunmen holding prison officers hostage at gunpoint so they could release a convicted drug kingpin. It has hints of something from a Hollywood movie, and it is unique, for it is the first ever armed snatch of a convicted prisoner in the entire history of Cambodia. And although this was an exceedingly daring raid, they thought they had made a clean getaway. Well, they were wrong. They were very wrong, as the snatch was in fact a fiasco, and each and every one of them has now been arrested, and the main reason they were caught was the plan was so very, very bad.
It was a crime never carried out before in the history of the kingdom, and it bordered on lunacy to think that this kind of behaviour could ever be forgiven or that those involved would ever get away with it. Add into the fact that the plan was so badly conceived it borders on laughable. It was at 8 a.m. that 4 prison officers brought a Chinese prisoner who had been convicted for drug trafficking to a dentist's. The 4 officers let the prisoner into the surgery to be treated, and they stationed themselves outside the treatment room. It was then that 5 masked gunmen stormed into the clinic. A police spokesman picks up the story for us. During the raid, the 5 gunmen, who are Chinese nationals, pointed their weapons at the officers and handcuffed them. They then freed the prisoner and took him to a waiting car and then fled the scene. Lieutenant Colonel Sarin told the Khmer Times, the officers were stunned by the level of violence they had just witnessed, but it was only 1 hour later on the outskirts of the city that the getaway vehicle was found. And it is about now we get to see how unbelievably badly this caper was planned. For in that vehicle, quite incredibly, the police found everything. And I do mean everything, including the 5 pistols, the silencers, as well as 5 masks and 5 sets of gloves. DNA was everywhere. And that was only part of the evidence treasure trove that this bungling gang had left behind. They left a trail of clues so wide you only had to stand atop of the nearest hill to know which way to head to locate them. And with this mountain of evidence, police only took 2 days to arrest each and every gunman. Then the story came out. It seems the Chinese nationals had flown in from America, where the plan was formulated. They then flew into the country to commit this idiotic heist. But now they can sit back, as they will be staying here an awful lot longer than they ever imagined. Now, there's one aspect of this story that you would have completely missed, even after seeing the footage, and that is this guy we're focusing on, the receptionist. He sat through the entire incident, and he receptioned like no man has ever receptioned ever. Even at one point, a customer walks into the dental surgery and he directs them directly into the armed gunman. There has never been a receptionist so dedicated to staying at his post. That was until he had to leave. But he did return because he forgot his mobile phone.
Already on this cast, we have had gunmen acting like the capital is a movie set, bursting into a dental surgery to free a drug kingpin. Well, how do I follow that? Well, how about this for keeping things in the major league? A businessman has been charged with defrauding innocent investors out of $100 million. Yes, I did just say $100 million. But how did this con man attain such incredibly high levels of funding? Well, he tapped into Cambodia's gold rush, and that is land sales. The hapless victims wanted to be in on the property boom, and to do so they borrowed money from their banks. But the tycoon they invested in was not buying land, but funding his unbelievably lavish lifestyle.
The land tycoon was nothing like he appeared, for he represented himself as the very epitome of success, with fast cars, a huge mansion, and was even surrounded by a gang of bodyguards wherever he went. He quite simply impressed people, and they wanted some of his wealth. But it all came to a very abrupt halt when he was charged with an absolutely colossal fraud. The bodyguards were also charged as they had assaulted arresting officers, and they had done so savagely that 4 policemen were seriously wounded. And the officers only maintained order when they discharged their firearms. And it was then that the bodyguards realised how serious the police were. The crime itself was simple. Most of the victims borrowed money from banks to invest in the company's land projects in order to gain a monthly return on their investment. But the investors never received any payment from the company, causing them to get into debt with the banks. And so far, over 200 people have lodged a lawsuit for fraud, and it is believed there are many more people who are victims. And with an estimated total of $100 million being stolen, this case will run and run. But here's the thing. Many lives have been shattered by this con. The victims won't be able to pay for school fees, for hospital bills, and other basic needs, as they are now tied into a debt trap that they cannot service. So when I tell you this, that the perpetrator of this huge fraud under Article 380 of the Penal Code faces a maximum of only 5 years in jail. And then I think you will now understand that the victims themselves will be far from happy, for he has devastated so many lives.
This week on our crime desk we have 2 cases of policemen running wild. Now, a policeman's lot is not always a happy one. In our first story this week, we saw them held at gunpoint. In our second, they were beaten up by a corrupt tycoon's bodyguards. But in this next story, sadly, the pendulum has swung in completely the opposite direction, and the policemen themselves have run wild and have committed such abuses of power that one man was very severely beaten and another laid dead whilst in police custody.
In our first case, a police officer has beaten a man so violently and so viciously he left his victim unconscious on the floor. The incident took place in Phnom Penh when a drunk driver hit a house and then a motorcyclist. The police were called, and the officer who arrived on the scene was a Mr. Huth Kong, and he did not quite see eye to eye with the drunk driver. So he beat the driver so severely he left him unconscious on the pavement. And there have been many calls for the full force of the law to be imposed on this officer, as this kind of violence is as unforgivable as it is shocking. In our second case, it only gets worse. A police officer is being sued for torture. A complaint has been issued against a deputy inspector alleging that he was responsible for torturing a man to death that was being held in his custody. The complaint states that the deputy inspector of Bante Minche Police was responsible for the death of a 28-year-old male. The dead man's father has said, "In the morning, my son went out to cut the grass as usual. At 2 o'clock that morning, my sister called me to tell me that my son had been arrested and was now in hospital. I saw my son in the emergency room. He was bleeding from his mouth and had bruises on his face, his chest, his back, and his arms." The man's father said he seemed to be very severely beaten. In fact, it seems he had been beaten to death whilst in police custody. And the family are seeking $10,000 compensation. Yeah, that's right. You're thinking what I'm thinking. That ain't much money for a son, is it? But this father wants more. He wants the perpetrator locked up in the jail that he once guarded.
A hospital has uncovered a most unusual scam, one that uses seriously ill patients to solicit money, and it's all so very simple. You see, the perpetrators of the scam go into a hospital taking photos of the most critically ill. The iller they look and the more wires and pipes they have hanging out of their bodies, the better it is, especially if they are elderly. And when they have a goodly batch of depressing photos, they post them on Facebook and ask for cash. Well, I say ask, it's more pleading for money. And I would bet they add a pile of crying emojis. The scam, it is said, had limited success for a short while. That was until a hospital employee spotted one of her patients on Facebook.
It was Kompong Tom Provincial Hospital that uncovered the scam, where pictures of seriously ill or injured patients were posted on social media, with a message urging people to send money to bank accounts. The fraud was discovered by the hospital after it found a picture of a car fire victim posted on Facebook. The Facebook post had amplified a story of woe, saying that there had been a taxi accident involving an explosion, and that how their mother had died and their child was now in an emergency room with serious injuries. One victim of the fraud said, "When I found I was scammed, I did not report the incident to the police, but I have become more vigilant." And that is really common. I know people who have been scammed here and they just don't report it because they don't want to lose face. So scammers have a free run. And unfortunately, such scams are common in Cambodia. One police officer has urged authorities to take action against these type of scams as it hurts patients or seriously ill victims who actually do need help. And on the other hand, it stops the charitable people from helping out others because they feel that they may be scammed. We at the Khmer Times spoke with a lawyer and he told us that anyone who posted pictures of patients or seriously ill victims on social media fraudulently and requested money can be convicted. He told us that by law they could be imprisoned for 2 to 5 years. And that prison term is rather interesting. Do you remember story 2 about that tycoon that stole $100 million? Well, his prison term is exactly the same if convicted, be it pictures on Facebook or be it 100 million. The prison term is between 2 and 5 years.
It's time to have a look ahead and see what the weather has in store for us next week.
Did you know the smell of rain has its own name? It is petriol. There you go, that's just to pad out a rather boring forecast, because what we have is the same. We have rain right across the board, the temperature in the high 20s, and the humidity will be hovering around the 70% mark. Only a few more weeks to go, folks, and we're back to blazing sunshine.
This has been the Khmer Times News. Please do subscribe and comment and stay up to date with all the breaking news by following us on both Facebook and Telegram. This has been Paolo Bonini, and that was the week that was. I'll see you next weekend for your weekly Roundup.